Young black boy helps millionaire with flat tire. What happened next changed his life forever. A man one day traveling through a city suddenly had a flat tire and no hope of fixing it. Then came a young boy who fixed it with ease. When the old man wanted to pay, the boy said, "No need. I'm happy I could help. That's enough for me. My granddad always said, if you can make a difference for someone, do it. Don't expect anything back." And from this point, what the old man did next changed his life forever. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special for you. Oliver Smith had never changed a tire in his life. Not once. He had always hired someone, a mechanic, an assistant, anyone, to handle such menial tasks while he tended to his appointments, correspondence, or the quiet, carefully curated routine of his days. And yet, here he was, standing beside his sleek black sedan on a stretch of Kentucky road that seemed to stretch forever, the sun pressing down with a stubborn warmth, a flat tire staring him in the face like a silent accusation. The rubber had split along the sidewall, and for the first time in decades, Oliver felt a pang of helplessness. The road was quiet, unusually so, the kind of silence that made even the chirping of distant birds sound loud. The horizon melted into rolling green hills, dotted with stands of pine and the occasional farmhouse. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint, earthy scent of dirt and grass, mingled with the lingering tang of asphalt from the road beneath his polished shoes. Oliver tugged at his collar, adjusting it without much thought, and tried to summon patience he didn't feel. He had not prepared for this. This inconvenience was more than a nuisance, it was an affront to the life he had built, where everything ran smoothly, precisely, predictably. He bent down to examine the tire, fingers brushing against the gritty rubber, and he couldn't remember the last time he had been this close to something so ordinary. The car had been a gift to himself upon retiring, a final indulgence for decades of careful planning, a black sedan that gleamed like a jewel under the sun. And yet it was useless now, stranded on the cracked pavement, as vulnerable as any other vehicle on this lonely road. A low hum of the wind in the trees was interrupted by the occasional distant rumble of a truck, a reminder that life moved on even when he felt stuck. Oliver sighed, a sound that seemed unusually loud against the emptiness of the surroundings. He stepped back, brushing imaginary dust from his tailored jacket, and cursed under his breath, not at the tire, exactly, but at the circumstances. He had imagined this trip as a short retreat, a few hours away from the quiet of his mansion, a chance to think without interruption. He had pictured a drive through the rolling hills, the sun warming his face, a thermos of coffee at his side. Instead, he was trapped, the solitude of the road pressing in, and he realized that the life he had carefully structured, the wealth and comfort he had surrounded himself with, could not shield him from moments like this. He looked around again, down the winding road that disappeared into the hills, hoping to see a passing car, a friendly stranger, anyone who might offer help. The asphalt shimmered faintly under the sun, the edges of the road blending into the tall grass. A wooden fence, weathered and leaning, traced the perimeter of a distant field. The air smelled faintly of wildflowers and sun-baked earth, and yet it carried a note of isolation that gnawed at him. Oliver felt the first real pang of vulnerability he could remember in years. The meticulous walls he had built around himself, composed of wealth, control, and habit, suddenly seemed thin and permeable. He ran a hand through his silver hair and tried to recall the last time he had felt this small, this irrelevant, this entirely dependent on circumstance rather than control. The car had served him faithfully for years, a symbol of accomplishment and taste, yet here it was, useless without someone else's hands to mend it. He straightened up, dusting his hands on his trousers, and took a slow breath. There had to be a solution. There had to be someone around who could help. As he gazed down the empty road, the quiet stretched on, unbroken and indifferent. And then, as if the world had finally shifted just slightly, a movement in the distance caught his eye, a boy, walking with a casual confidence along the edge of the pavement. Worn sneakers scuffed against the asphalt, a faded t-shirt and jeans that had clearly seen better days, but a poise in his step that suggested competence beyond his years. Oliver squinted, unsure if he should be wary or relieved. For the first time that day, a flicker of hope stirred within him. Perhaps, he thought, this inconvenience was not a dead end after all. Perhaps help had arrived. The boy came closer, his steps sure, unhurried, like he belonged on this road even if no one else did. Oliver's first instinct was to hesitate, to remind himself that the world had rules, that strangers, especially boys alone, weren't always trustworthy. But there was something in the way he moved, a quiet confidence, a lack of pretense, that stopped him from retreating. "Need a hand?" the boy called out, voice calm, steady, carrying easily across the warm afternoon air. It was simple, unassuming, but it held a weight of certainty that Oliver hadn't felt from anyone in years. Yes, I suppose I do," Oliver said, his voice almost foreign to himself. It sounded uncertain, small even, and he quickly tried to cover it with a cough. He realized, with a mixture of amusement and mild embarrassment, that he had never spoken to anyone like this in such circumstances. The boy nodded once and dropped his bag onto the gravel, a well-used canvas satchel that might have carried books or tools, or both. "You got a jack?" the boy asked, glancing at the car with the kind of familiarity a mechanic might show, but there was no arrogance in his tone. Just matter-of-fact observation, the sort that comes from knowing your way around machines because you have to, not because you choose to. Oliver fumbled, digging into the trunk, pulling out the jack and spare tire, feeling awkward under the boy's quiet gaze. The boy didn't hover or lecture, he simply rolled up his sleeves, revealing lean forearms, and started positioning the jack with ease. Oliver watched, fascinated, as the boy worked efficiently, hands sure and deliberate, muttering instructions to himself under his breath. "You know, my grandfather showed me this," the boy said casually, as if it explained everything. "Always said, if you can fix something yourself, you don't have to wait for someone else." His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was pride there, a calm assurance that came from hard-earned experience rather than vanity. Oliver realized he was holding his breath. Watching this boy, he felt a strange mixture of awe and humility. Here was someone young, with nothing but worn clothes and old sneakers, demonstrating a competence and selflessness that Oliver had never encountered in his carefully controlled life. He was used to people offering service in exchange for payment, for reward, for recognition. This boy asked for none of it. As the tire lifted from the rim and the new one slid into place, Oliver felt a flicker of gratitude he hadn't felt in decades, a sensation that was both surprising and unsettling. He opened his mouth, ready to offer something, perhaps a tip, a token of thanks, but the boy shook his head. "Don't worry about it," he said simply, standing back to admire his work. "I'm just glad I could help." Oliver blinked, not sure he had ever encountered such generosity. The words lingered in the air, humble but profound, and he felt the first true stirrings of something he hadn't realized he was missing, connection, human connection, that existed beyond contracts and obligations, beyond wealth and status. And for the first time that afternoon, he wondered whether this chance meeting might change more than just the inconvenience of a flat tire. Oliver had watched many things in his life, business deals, auctions, art sales, but nothing quite like this. The boy's hands moved with deliberate precision, fingers tracing familiar paths over metal and rubber, tightening bolts and adjusting the jack with a quiet assurance that made Oliver feel both insignificant and privileged to witness it. There was no hurry, no need to impress, no self-consciousness about who he was helping. Just the work, done well, with care. As the final bolt clicked into place, the boy stepped back, wiping his hands on the faded knees of his jeans. "All done," he said, voice steady, almost casual, though there was a quiet pride beneath it. Oliver felt a flush of surprise, and something else, a deeper, harder-to-name emotion stirring in his chest. He had never received service this straightforward, this unadorned by expectation or formality. "Thank you," Oliver said, instinctively reaching for his wallet. "I insist. You should be paid for this." The boy shook his head, a small, knowing smile forming. "No need. I'm happy I could help. That's enough for me." Oliver hesitated, struck by the simplicity and honesty of those words. It was as if he had stumbled into a world governed by different rules, rules he had forgotten existed. No payment. No recognition. No record of accomplishment. Just doing what needed to be done, because it was right. You really mean that? Oliver asked, his voice quieter now, almost tentative, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment. I do, the boy said. My granddad always said, if you can make a difference for someone, do it. Don't expect anything back. He glanced at Oliver with a candid expression, his eyes bright but unassuming. I like helping people. It feels good. Oliver felt a lump in his throat. He remembered the countless times in his life when he had given, yes, given, but always with strings attached, always with an expectation. A donation to a foundation, a check to a charity, a gift for a friend or associate, every act measured, calculated, deliberate. And now here was a boy, 13, maybe 14, working with worn hands and worn clothes, giving freely without thought of reward. He looked at the boy's sneakers, scuffed and fraying, the faded t-shirt that had clearly weathered more than a few seasons, and for the first time in years, he felt a sharp awareness of his own excess. His car, his mansion, his investments, his careful calendar, all of it seemed trivial compared to this moment, this simple, human act. The boy hoisted his bag over his shoulder, brushing dust from it, and offered a nod. Take care of yourself, sir. Drive safe. There was no condescension in his tone, no hint that Oliver was anything other than human, deserving of the same simple courtesy the boy gave to everyone. As Oliver climbed back into his car, he stared at the boy for a long moment, unsure whether he wanted to leave or linger. He felt something stirring inside him, a quiet recognition that this encounter was more than chance. It was a lesson, humility, generosity, the kind of dignity that could not be bought or measured. The engine rumbled to life, tires gripping the asphalt, and Oliver started driving, but his mind lingered on the boy's face, the worn sneakers, the calm confidence. The warmth of the sun on his face felt different now, more insistent, more meaningful. He realized he would not forget this day. He had been given something far more valuable than a tire fixed. He had been given a glimpse of a life lived fully in the small, generous acts of everyday courage. And as the road stretched ahead, twisting through the hills, Oliver's thoughts turned to one unshakable question: who was this boy, and how could he see the world so clearly while the rest of them, Oliver included, so often missed what truly mattered? Oliver drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt filling the space where words might have been. The boy's image lingered in his mind, the worn sneakers, the faded t-shirt, the confident ease with which he had tackled the tire. Oliver found himself studying that quiet dignity again and again, trying to understand it, trying to grasp why it had shaken him so. He realized that he had spent much of his life insulated from people like this, from people whose worth was measured not in dollars or possessions, but in actions and integrity. He glanced down at his polished hands resting on the steering wheel, fingers brushing the smooth leather. Hands that had signed contracts worth millions, shaken countless hands, arranged fortunes, and yet had never, truly, fixed something with purpose for the sake of another. He could almost feel the contrast, his life of calculated control versus the boy's effortless generosity. It was humbling, and he felt a pull in his chest, a mixture of admiration, guilt, and longing. The hills passed by in a slow blur, green waves punctuated by old wooden fences and distant barns. The air smelled of pine and fresh earth, tinged with the faint residue of asphalt. It was quiet, but not lonely. Not the emptiness of his mansion, not the sterile silence of rooms filled with expensive furniture but devoid of warmth. Here, the world seemed alive, and the boy had breathed a part of that life into Oliver's consciousness. He remembered the boy's words, "I'm just happy I could help." Simple. Unassuming. Honest. Oliver could not recall the last time he had heard a truth so plain and yet so profound. It pressed against him, reminding him that all his planning, all his careful accumulation, had never offered him this, the clarity of human connection, the quiet joy of being useful in the moment, for the sake of another. For a long time, Oliver found himself thinking about the boy, imagining the life he must lead. He pictured a modest home tucked into the hills, a mother who raised him with care, perhaps a grandfather who had shown him the ways of practical skill and quiet responsibility. He imagined laughter in a small kitchen, the smell of home-cooked meals, a life rich not in possessions but in shared experience. The thought was both foreign and deeply appealing. Oliver realized, with an uncomfortable honesty, that his own home had none of that warmth. The mansion he had inherited, filled with priceless art, expensive furniture, and polished surfaces, had grown cold and silent over the years. It reflected his success, yes, but not his humanity. Here was a boy with almost nothing in material terms, yet he radiated purpose and contentment in a way Oliver had long forgotten existed. He sighed, a deep, slow exhale, as the road wound on. This small act, changing a tire, refusing payment, offering help without expectation, had unsettled him, challenged him, and in some unexpected way, inspired him. He realized he wanted to see the boy again, not just to repay him, but to understand, to learn, to glimpse more of the life the boy inhabited so naturally. And as the sun began to tilt lower, casting long shadows across the hills, Oliver made a quiet, deliberate decision. He would find him. Not to impose his wealth, nor to offer empty thanks, but to connect. To bridge the distance between their worlds. Because, for the first time in a long while, Oliver understood that the richest moments of life might not be bought, but given, and perhaps, shared. Oliver woke the next morning with a determination he hadn't felt in years. The memory of the boy, Marcus, was vivid, the quiet competence, the worn sneakers, the refusal of payment. He could not shake the sense that this encounter had opened a door he had long ignored, a door leading to a world that was not governed by wealth or possession but by connection, dignity, and shared purpose. He wanted to see Marcus again, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity, and, perhaps, the faint stirrings of hope that life could still surprise him. He drove slowly toward Harlan, a modest town nestled in the Appalachian foothills, guided by instinct and fragments of detail he had noticed when watching the boy walk along the road. The town unfolded gradually, small houses dotting the hillside, smoke curling from chimneys, a church bell chiming faintly in the distance. It was quiet, yet alive in a way his own carefully maintained neighborhoods never were. Children played in yards, neighbors waved as they passed one another, and the occasional dog bark punctuated the steady rhythm of everyday life. Oliver parked near the center of town and began asking questions, careful to keep his tone unobtrusive, his questions respectful. Most people knew Marcus, or at least had heard of him. It seemed he was well-liked, not for any extraordinary talent, but for the way he carried himself, helpful, polite, dependable. Oliver found it remarkable, how someone so young could leave such a clear impression on a community, simply by being present and willing to contribute. Eventually, he arrived at a small, worn house at the edge of town. Its paint was faded, shingles sagged slightly on the roof, and the swing set in the yard creaked with age. But as soon as he stepped closer, Oliver felt something unexpected, a warmth that radiated outward, soft and steady, like the memory of a long-forgotten home. Laughter echoed from inside, casual, genuine, the kind of sound that could make a stranger feel welcome without even entering. He knocked on the door and was greeted by a woman with a kind face, her hands slightly rough from work, but her posture confident, her smile honest. Marcus appeared behind her, eyes widening for a brief moment as he recognized Oliver. "Mr. Smith," the boy said, surprised but not frightened. You came back." "I did," Oliver replied, his voice careful, tentative, carrying a sincerity that surprised even him. "I wanted to see you again. And perhaps meet your family." Marcus' mother studied him for a moment, and then nodded, inviting him inside. The house was modest, but it radiated life. The kitchen smelled faintly of bread baking, spices simmering, a homely, comforting aroma that made Oliver's chest tighten with something he couldn't quite name. There was clutter, yes, books stacked on counters, a basket of laundry waiting, but it was the kind of clutter that spoke of living, not neglect. Each object had a purpose, a story, a place in the rhythm of family life. They shared a meal together, simple food, but prepared with care. As they ate, Oliver listened. Marcus spoke of school, of his dream to become an engineer, of the small projects he tinkered with in his spare time. His mother spoke of her work, the challenges she faced, and the pride she had in raising a son like him. Oliver was struck not just by their honesty, but by the mutual respect that threaded through their conversation. No one overawed anyone else, each voice mattered equally. For Oliver, it was a revelation. He had been surrounded by people his entire life who deferred to wealth, to status, to appearance, and yet here was a household where wealth meant nothing, where dignity and connection reigned instead. He felt both humbled and inspired. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, a thought began to form in his mind: perhaps he could help them, not as a gesture of charity, but as a way to participate in this life, to build, to contribute, to belong in some meaningful way. He lingered long after the meal, walking through the small rooms, observing the little details, the crooked picture frames, the worn floors, the sunlight catching dust motes in the living room, and imagining what a few thoughtful improvements could do. It wasn't just the house he noticed, but the energy of it, the care, the resilience, the way they had carved out joy and stability from modest means. He realized that this was the life he had been missing, the human element he had long neglected. When he finally left, the sun was lower in the sky, painting the hills in gold and amber. Oliver drove back slowly, mind alive with plans, ideas, and a newfound sense of purpose. He knew, without a doubt, that he would return, and that when he did, it would not simply be as a visitor. He would participate. He would help. Not as a benefactor, but as someone eager to contribute to the warmth and dignity he had glimpsed in this small home. Oliver returned to Harlan the next week, this time with purpose, a plan forming in his mind that had little to do with money and everything to do with connection. He had thought about the house, about the sagging porch, the leaky roof, the rusty swing set, and the modest but worn interior, and he realized that he could help, not to impress, not to control, but to participate. It was a simple idea, but in his life, simplicity had become rare. Marcus was waiting in the yard when Oliver arrived, a curious expression on his face. "You're back," the boy said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I thought maybe you wouldn't come again." "I told you I would," Oliver replied, stepping out of the car, feeling a lightness in his chest he hadn't known in years. "I want to help. And I think you might enjoy learning a few things along the way." For Marcus, the idea of building, fixing, creating with someone else was thrilling. He had always tinkered with scraps, with small projects inspired by the lessons his grandfather had taught him. Now, under Oliver's careful guidance, he could see a larger vision taking shape. Together, they began with the porch, loosening boards that had warped over decades, sanding rough edges, and carefully replacing each plank. Oliver marveled at the boy's focus, his methodical movements, the way he absorbed instruction without hesitation. As the weeks passed, their work expanded. They tackled the roof, climbing cautiously, hammering nails, tightening loose shingles, Oliver feeling the thrill of exertion he had not experienced in decades. He guided Marcus in reading measurements, in understanding angles, in seeing the process as both art and science. Marcus, in turn, brought energy and curiosity, asking questions that forced Oliver to reconsider approaches he had long taken for granted. Together, they created not just a repaired house, but a shared project that transformed their understanding of each other. The swing set in the yard was next. Rusted, uneven, and dangerous, it had sat abandoned for years. Oliver insisted they dismantle it completely, treating the old metal and worn wood with care before building a sturdier, safer structure. Marcus worked with steady hands, and as they tightened the final bolts, he laughed, a clear, unrestrained sound that made Oliver smile in a way he hadn't for years. The boy's joy was infectious, reminding Oliver that the satisfaction of work was often found in the smallest, simplest moments. Inside the house, they repaired walls, repainted rooms, and replaced old furniture where necessary. But more than the physical transformation, it was the sense of life being restored, of dignity renewed, that Oliver noticed most. Marcus' mother watched their work with quiet pride, offering small meals, tea, and conversation, while giving space for Oliver and Marcus to collaborate. Oliver realized that for all his wealth, he had rarely worked with such clarity of purpose, and certainly never with such gratitude. In the process, a new rhythm developed. Mornings were filled with measured work, afternoons with lessons in construction, problem-solving, and planning. Evenings brought shared meals, stories, and quiet reflection. Oliver began to understand the subtle, profound ways that the boy's generosity had affected him. He was no longer a distant observer, no longer a man defined by what he owned. he was part of a family, part of a shared life, learning again the value of giving without expectation. Marcus, too, was changing. His fascination with the projects deepened, and he approached each task with a mix of careful study and inspired creativity. He learned to read blueprints, to calculate angles, to anticipate the needs of a project before being told. Oliver watched him and remembered his own grandfather, the lessons of discipline and precision, passed down quietly, unassumingly, and he realized that teaching the boy was as rewarding as any venture he had ever undertaken. Weeks passed, and the house, once modest and weathered, began to gleam with renewed life. The porch stood solid and welcoming, the roof was secure, the swing set sturdy and inviting. Inside, the walls and floors reflected care, effort, and pride. But the most profound transformation was invisible, the growing bond between Oliver and Marcus, the shared understanding that life's value was measured not in possessions, but in moments, in relationships, in the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work. On the last day of the renovation, Oliver stood on the freshly repaired porch and watched Marcus swing back and forth, the boys' laughter ringing out across the yard. For the first time in decades, Oliver felt fully present, fully alive. He realized that in giving, in teaching, in working alongside this boy and his family, he had rediscovered something essential: purpose, connection, and the joy of making a difference, not just in material ways, but in hearts and lives. Oliver lingered on the porch long after the work was done, watching Marcus and his mother move through the house and yard with a quiet ease that spoke of pride and belonging. The sun was low now, painting the hills in shades of amber and gold, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly sanded wood and late summer grass. Everything felt alive, imbued with purpose and care. It was a stark contrast to the silent, polished expanses of his mansion, where wealth had never guaranteed warmth. He realized that in the weeks he had spent with Marcus, he had not only repaired a house, he had been repairing something within himself. The boy's quiet generosity, the family's resilience, and the simple joy of shared work had reminded him of what life could feel like when it was lived fully, openly, and with attention to others. He had spent decades accumulating wealth, organizing comfort, and protecting his time, yet he had rarely encountered such richness in experience, in connection, in meaning. Marcus ran up to him, cheeks flushed from play, eyes bright with curiosity and pride. "It looks amazing," he said, gesturing toward the porch and the swing set, the house now transformed from weathered and tired to sturdy and welcoming. "We couldn't have done it without you." Oliver smiled, a soft, genuine smile, the kind that felt unfamiliar yet welcome. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "It's not just me. You've worked hard, too. You've learned, you've built, and you've given more than you realize." Marcus tilted his head, considering this, then grinned. "I guess we helped each other, huh?" "Yes," Oliver said, nodding. "Exactly that." For the first time in years, he felt part of something larger than himself, part of a family and a life that valued effort, care, and respect above status or wealth. He thought of the countless moments he had spent alone in his mansion, the quiet dinners, the art-filled rooms that felt hollow, the endless planning and organizing that had never brought him this satisfaction. Now, each small detail, the swing creaking gently in the yard, the sturdy porch underfoot, Marcus' laughter ringing across the hills, felt like proof of life lived fully, generously, and meaningfully. Over the following months, Oliver returned to Harlan often. He did not come to assert control or to showcase generosity, but to continue being present, to share meals, work on small projects, and mentor Marcus in ways that respected the boy's growing independence and curiosity. With each visit, he felt the walls around him soften, the careful distance he had maintained for so long dissolving into warmth, connection, and a sense of belonging he had never expected to find. Marcus, in turn, thrived. His fascination with construction, problem-solving, and learning grew, nurtured by Oliver's guidance and the family's encouragement. He approached each challenge with confidence and care, knowing that his efforts mattered, and that the work he did could shape the world around him in meaningful ways. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Appalachian hills and the sky blazed with colors neither of them could name, Oliver sat quietly on the porch, watching Marcus and his mother move through the yard, laughing together. He felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for what he had, but for what he had been given, the chance to connect, to contribute, and to witness the dignity and joy that came from giving without expectation. In that moment, he understood something simple yet powerful: life's true value is not measured in wealth, status, or possessions. It is measured in moments of shared effort, in the kindness we offer freely, in the respect we give and receive, and in the relationships we nurture. He had been given a gift by a boy in worn sneakers, and in return, he had been able to give, not out of obligation, but out of connection and care. And as the evening settled softly over the hills, Oliver smiled, truly, fully, feeling for the first time in decades that he was home. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.